Hey climbers, this is Climb by VSC, a weekly show about building and scaling startups in the world of climate innovation. My name is Jay Kapoor, general partner of VSC Ventures and co-host of Climb. Every week, I or a member of our VSC team will speak with a pioneer in the climate tech world about emerging technologies and novel ideas that will turn the tide on climate change. We've all heard enough of the doom and gloom. It's time for stories of purpose-driven innovation that lead to sustainable, positive change. In today's episode, my VSC colleague Doug Patterson speaks with Laurie Menoud, a partner at @ONE Ventures, which focuses on investing in a world where humanity can become a net positive to nature. I like that. Laurie is a biotechnologist by training, and she's built a dozen ventures out of DoD research programs. This is a great conversation with an operator turned investor, and I know you're going to learn a lot. I'm so happy that you've decided to join us. Now let's climb.
All right, welcome to today's Climb podcast. I'm Doug Patterson with VSC. Joining me today is Laurie Menoud with @ONE Ventures. Laurie is a partner at @ONE. It's a VC firm that is focused on investing in a world where humanity becomes a net positive to nature. And you can say that's the positive spin, but you're supposed to be positive in marketing, but we also like to say that you're going to destroy the businesses that are destroying our planet. So I love the attitude of the firm you've got there. Laurie is a biotechnologist by training. She's played roles in the chemical industry. She's built dozens of ventures out of DoD research programs. And she's currently focused on finding, funding, and growing teams that catalyze planet positive industries. And so some of the companies that @ONE Ventures has funded, for example, you've got the robotic indoor farming company called Iron Ox. They're investing in earth digestible foam packaging with Cruz Foam. And then there's also, zero water textile dyeing company, Alchemie Technology. Lots of cool stuff. I always love learning about the companies that @ONE is investing in because it always feels very sci-fi. It's very sort of futuristic and exciting to sort of hear about what's going on. So thank you so much for joining us today, Laurie, and excited to dig into some of these topics with you.
Thanks for the invitation, Doug.
Awesome. Well, let's get started. I'd love to know a little bit about, your background in science and as a microbiologist and in research, biochemistry, all of these things. How has that made you a better investor? How did those kind of skills that you develop translate over into the world of VC?
Yeah, and I guess maybe those skills and this background sounds a bit unusual because when you look at the venture capital industry, typically people have worked in finance or have been kind of executives at software companies, which is fine when you invest in consumer or enterprise software. But my background is very different. I spent my career in research, launching deep tech companies and in the industry. And I think that to me, by working in the lab, it really helped me understand and comprehend how things work at a fundamental level. And it's something I use today, every day, to really understand new technologies and assess their technical feasibility, which is critical when you make deep tech investments. And I think in addition to that, understanding also the timing for deep technologies is critical. I spent several years at SRI International. It was the birthplace of world-changing innovation like internet, teleoperated robotic surgery, or Siri, which is on all of the iPhone. It was also the place where the computer mouse was invented. And they invented the computer mouse in the 60s. And back then,
I've heard of that. I've heard of the computer mouse before.
Yes, but in the 60s, personal computer did not exist. So they licensed it to Xerox, to Apple, and a few other customers. But personal computers ended up being viable and commercial in the 80s. And so basically, they didn't make much money out of it. So really understanding what's the right timing for an innovation for deep technologies is also critical. And I've learned about that the hard way. It's something that makes me a better investor for deep technologies.
Timing is everything, right? And people talk a lot about climate tech, but I think they're excited to kind of see what it leads to. Do you think now is an exciting time in climate tech in particular?
We need to find solutions right now, and I think the technologies have matured. So it's not the first time we are kind of looking at climate tech. It used to be called clean tech over 10 years ago. I think 10 years ago, technologies were less mature. People were also not thinking so much about unit economics. I think things are different today. Technologies have matured. And if you do the right investment and you think about the unit economics, and when I say unit economics, it's really focusing on technologies that are going to be economically viable, meaning technologies that are going to be at least at cost parity with the other solutions that are on the market. I think there is a good path to find and invest in climate tech solutions that are going to have a big impact, positive impact on our world. What we are doing is completely resetting the industries. If I take the example of steel making, so steel making, not everybody knows that steel making is responsible for 7% of the global carbon emissions annually. When we looked at the sector, we are not looking at processes that could reduce a bit of those carbon emissions. We found a company called Helios developing a completely novel chemistry for iron reduction and fully eliminating carbon emissions from the process. So we are going from 7% emissions to 0% emissions while having a process which is cheaper than current blast furnaces processes. And that's typically the type of investments and companies we are looking for.
That's awesome. And it's so funny to think about how, I'm sure like the big steel manufacturers are really excited that everyone's kind of focused on plastic. Like plastic is kind of like the go-to thing that people who want to get into sustainability or start changing their own kind of lifestyle. Plastic is kind of the go-to thing. No one really talks about the steel industry. So I'm sure the big steel manufacturers are really excited about that. But now they've got people like you coming for them.
Yeah, I mean, when people think about climate change and climate tech, yes, it's plastic is one. It's changing your kind of lighting with LED lighting. It's putting a solar panel on your roof. It's buying an electric car. But I mean, the carbon emissions today, it's much more than just that. It's your heating system in your building, which is producing lots of carbon. It's the cement we use for buildings. Similar to the steel industry, it's responsible for 7% of the carbon emissions. And it's the food we eat and the way we produce proteins. Animal farming, also big methane emitter. And so when we look at climate tech with that one, we really look at this broad scope and we look at targeting heavy industries as well.
Let's get into talking about deep tech, because deep tech is something that you've been focused a lot on in your career. It's kind of one of those buzzy terms that maybe people read about and you kind of like, yeah, deep tech, I know what that is, but maybe you don't really know. What would you say deep tech actually is, and why is it important to invest in these types of technologies?
Yeah. So deep tech, think about emerging technologies that rely on either kind of engineering innovation or scientific advances. For example, robotics, artificial intelligence, synthetic biology, advanced materials. Those are deep technologies and they are critical because, again, if you think at the climate crisis, we are not going to solve it with software. We need kind of innovation in chemistries, again, steel making. We need new chemistries to produce steel without producing CO2. Same for cement. We need new chemistries, new processes to address those issues. And I think also with deep tech, we can start scaling massively activities like ecosystem restoration. We have a company in the portfolio called Dendra Systems. They use drones to plant trees. And they can plant 120 trees per minute. So with just 6 drones, you can plant basically 1 million trees in a day. And just to give you a sense of the scale, with 1 trillion tree, this would represent the total carbon debt we have to the planet. And basically with less than $1 billion, you could plant those trees. So I think using deep depth to both kind of reset the industries we have today, in addition to kind of scaling those ecosystem restoration activities are essential.
What would you say is kind of the most difficult part about sourcing deep tech investments? Is there like a key to the due diligence process or some sort of secret sauce that you guys have developed at One?
Yeah, maybe I'll take the example of software again, because when you think about software companies, it's very easy. If you have an excellent idea, a concept of the software company, maybe you find a friend, you are going to work a couple of months, write a few lines of codes, maybe launch this app, get some first customers, and then you can raise money. With deep tech, it's much harder because deep tech, again, relies on kind of engineering innovation and scientific advances. Usually it comes from labs. It comes from national labs, from research institutes, from universities, from incubators. So in order to source those deals, you need to be connected to these ecosystems and to know the labs, to know the professors that are there. And you need to be patient. Just to give you the example of Avalo, it's a company I invested in last year, company which has developed a novel machine learning algorithm to accelerate gene discovery with a focus on developing climate resilient crops. I met the company, it was not even the company, the two founders 3 years ago when they were at Duke University in the lab and started to think about maybe building a company around this technology they had developed. So of course it was too early stage for me, but I kept in touch with them for 2 years. We were chatting on a quarterly basis. I was hearing about their kind of technical progress. I was providing kind of advices. And when they were ready to raise their seed round, I was ready as well to invest. So it takes to build this ecosystem with research labs and to be patient with deep tech.
It also goes to show like that you never know what relationships may pay off down the line. You know, like you may meet someone really early on and, you know, it doesn't make sense to work together at that point. But if you stay in touch and, you know, you keep at what you're doing, then somewhere down the line, those kinds of relationships or meeting people in that sense can really pay off. It really is kind of a marathon.
Exactly.
What advice do you have for entrepreneurs who are seeking deep tech investments? What advice would you give to other investors who want to get into deep tech for people that are kind of like new to the space? What's your top advice for them?
Yeah, it is tough to raise funding when you are a deep tech company because many investors up there don't have necessarily deep tech background. So my recommendation number one would be find this lead investor who is going to understand deeply your work, your technology, and is going to make the other investors from the syndicate much more confident about the technology. And perhaps they'll be able to share their technical due diligence with them. I think that's the first part. Second part is also make sure to look at the profile of the investor you are going to talk to. And if this person is not technical, make sure you are going to provide kind of a digestible presentation of the technology. That's for entrepreneurs. And maybe for investors that want to go into deep tech, don't invest in deep tech just for the sake of deep tech. I mean, as you said earlier, deep tech sometimes looks like science fiction, so it's very cool. But at the same time, I mean, customers are not going to buy deep tech just for deep tech. The unit economics, once again, are very critical. You've probably heard about plenty of those companies that are sucking CO2 directly out of the atmosphere. Those are called DAC, so direct air capture companies. The issue with several ones is that it's not economically viable. I won't share the name, but I've read an article from one of them, which have set up a system to capture CO2 from the atmosphere, and they're able to capture the emission of worth of 800 cars per year. The cost of this plant is $15 million. And if you just do the calculation, there is 1.4 billion cars on the planet. So just to offset and to capture the CO2 emissions from all of those cars, it could cost us $20 quadrillion per year. Not billion, not trillion, quadrillion. And I will let you do the math. Passenger cars, it's only 5% of the global carbon emissions. So this doesn't make sense. So I think for investors, it's really important to focus on the right unit economics for the solutions.
So how do you ensure the investments in the deep tech space are going to pay off in a financial sense, that you're going to have positive outcomes as an investor?
So for us, it's always back to our kind of key investment criteria. It's looking at disruptive deep tech, so technologies that are completely novel, that have higher performances, but also have superior unit and environmental economics. Because ultimately, again, if you find those technologies that are going to solve critical needs for their customers with large total addressable market, while being at cost parity or cheaper, it's going to be a no-brainer for customers to adopt the solutions. And of course, if the environmental impact is big, then you get a successful, financially successful company developing a solution that is going to be adopted by many customers, and therefore the environmental impact is going to be much bigger. So from our perspective, we are not an impact fund. We are looking at companies that are going to be financially successful, and we believe that because they'll be successful financially, the impact on the environment is going to be much bigger.
What about measuring the outcomes in terms of building a more planet positive industry and kind of making these companies get us more net positive to nature? Are you tracking that in some way? How do you kind of keep that in mind as you're going along and growing with these companies?
Yeah, we are tracking that. And what's awesome about the investment thesis, again, it's not kind of ESG where we are tracking, how much paper have you used this year? How many times did you take a flight? Because the inherent nature of those companies is to be planet positive. So again, I look at this steel making company, which is completely eliminating carbon. As soon as they start selling iron, they're going to have a huge impact on the planet. And so that's what we are tracking. We are tracking the number of products that they sell. We have another company called Ascend Elements, which is focused on lithium-ion battery recycling and cathode manufacturing for electric vehicles. They've just built the largest lithium-ion battery recycling facility in North America. And so this year we are starting to sell. And so just tracking how much batteries they are recycling and how much cathodes they are going to sell is a way to understand really the impact of those companies.
Is there anything else that you look for or any kind of indicators that a deep tech investment could be a potentially successful one?
So again, looking at kind of the novelty of the IP, so the freedom to operate, for example, for the technologies they've built is really important. The unit economics, as you said, is one critical aspect of it. But it's not only about, again, deep tech for the sake of deep tech. We talk with customers, with industry experts to understand, this deep technologies is really solving a critical need. And is this need big enough? Because with venture capital, we are looking at big returns. So we want those total addressable market to be at least worth $1 billion. And so if we see that it's a kind of novelty in terms of the technology, strong freedom to operate, strong addressable market, that the unit economics are at least, at cost parity with the solutions, if not cheaper, and if the environmental economics are good, it's something very interesting for us. And then if the team is amazing with deep industry expertise, typically checking all of our boxes, and that's when we start doing deep due diligence on the company.
Is there a particular area of deep tech that you personally are most excited about or focused on as an investor?
So biotech, because it's close to my heart. Biotech, because novel fermentation techniques, for example, can help with solving the issues of producing proteins while reducing methane emissions. Microbiology, for example, for agriculture, I invested in a company called Puna Bio using extremophile bacteria in kind of high salinity lake and high altitude lakes to help plants grow in depleted soil and resist to climate change. Very excited about this one. And beyond biotech, chemistry is also close to my heart because I spent several years in the chemical industry. And their chemistry can solve lots of issues related to energy and electrification. We invested in a company called Noon Energy using CO2 to store energy. And basically CO2 is abundant, it's extremely cheap, so their battery can be 10x cheaper compared to lithium-ion batteries and can store energy for long duration, meaning 100 hours and more. And with those type of technologies, that's when you can start unlocking kind of 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, renewable energy.
It's amazing. I always love hearing about the companies that you're investing in because it is technology to get really excited about. And I think that people in general are kind of like was waiting for the new innovations that are going to solve climate change, just waiting and kind of getting more and more anxiety. So it's always exciting to hear that there are companies out there that do have solutions, and it makes you hopeful that it may just be a matter of time until things start to click and we do start to kind of send things back in that right direction. So love to hear about those kinds of companies. What would you say is the most important piece of advice that you've ever received, either maybe in your early career as a scientist or now in your career as an investor?
So this one, Doug, I'm not sure we should keep it because I've never had really mentors. I mean, being a woman in the VC industry is not always easy. And I've received advice actually that were not very productive. People always talk about mentors and you have to find a mentor to kind of evolve in your career. And I think you don't necessarily have to have a mentor. I mean, you work with people that can be very helpful to you and give you advice, and you can learn from their experience, from their perspective of the world. And I think you can also trust your intuition. And that's what I've done my entire career, trusting my intuition. I had ambition to be in the VC industry. Many people told me, you'll never manage to get there. It takes very long time to become a partner in the VC industry. And I was like, okay, I'm still going to try. Let's try it. There is nothing to lose. And so I think you can still succeed and have a successful career and end up with a job that is 100% fitting your life mission by trusting you and trusting your own intuition.
That's awesome. I love that answer because I think it's totally true. Not everyone has the inherent connections in their lives or the ability to get in the room with the people that would be their ideal mentors. And so it's awesome to hear a success story. And I think sticking to your intuition has worked out really well for you. So that's really awesome. And, I also kind of want to double back a little bit to the last question, sort of talking about your transition into becoming a VC. How did you make that transition from working in research to becoming a VC? What was that like? Or, how did you flip the switch from researcher to investor?
From pure technology to business, it happened gradually. The first time I heard about VC was in my first job in a startup company in the UK, where I was a microbiologist working on this new biological water treatment system. And of course, the startup was raising money. And that's when I realized, okay, VC is actually an excellent tool to build those companies, to bring those deep technologies to the market much faster. And so that's when I started getting interested into it. After that, I got a business degree, joined the chemical industry, started getting involved with M&A, with corporate VC, still being in research. And I started kind of working on the creation of deep tech companies. And of course, when you create a deep tech company, you need to raise money. So I started raising money for those companies. And at some point, I had kind of crossed the bridge and went on the other side of the table and started investing in companies. So it was just something kind of gradually happened during my career.
What advice would you have for young women out there who might want to get involved in VC? Obviously, it's a very male-dominated industry, and I'm sure you face some challenges in that regard. What advice do you have to young women who want to get into investing but maybe intimidated by the male-dominated nature of it?
We need more women in the VC industry. There are funds that are very diverse with diverse teams. At1 is one of them. We have 2/3 women in the team. So find those VCs who are who like and have diversity in mind when they hire people. And I think more and more, people are talking about it. So even traditional VCs, where most of the partners are still males, they start to understand that we need more women, we need more diversity, because also diversity is helping people make better investments and helping funds invest in diverse companies. So I would say find those investors who care about diversity and just try it again. As I was saying earlier, nothing to lose by reaching out to those VCs and by getting into interviews. Worst case, you'll have learned something and you'll have built your network. And maybe this investor is going to connect you to another VC, and at some point you'll be able to break into the industry.
So what about, working with deep tech companies gives you optimism about the future? Obviously, you have a lot of insight into sort of the state of the world and the state of industries. Are there things that take away from your optimism? And then how do you kind of maintain that optimism in your day to day?
Yeah, because when you hear about the news, it's pretty depressing. You have the impression that by the end of the centuries, we'll have destroyed the planet. All the biodiversity will be lost, but this could happen. This could happen, but at the same time, I'm very optimistic about the future because of all of the entrepreneurs that are working on fighting climate change, working on healing the planet. We launched at one that was back in February 2020, so almost 3 years ago. In just 3 years, we sourced over 4,000 companies. And look, we have a very small team. Initially, it was only the 3 of us. We moved to 5. Now we have 6 persons on the deal-making team. So 4,000 companies, that's a lot. And every day, I'm just more and more optimistic to see all of those entrepreneurs, those kind of young people that want to make a difference, that are passionate about nature, and who are brilliant minds developing those incredible technologies. So very optimistic about the future. I know it's pretty scary when we hear the news, but there is hope. And we need to act now, and a lot of people are acting now and want to make a big difference.
Really appreciate your attitude about that, and really appreciate you joining us on the podcast, and look forward to chatting more with you sometime soon.
Thank you.
Well, that's all for this week's episode of Climb by VSC. Thank you so much for watching and listening. A few quick shout outs before you go. Our thanks to Laurie for sharing her wisdom with us on Climb. You can learn more about her investments at www.at1ventures.com. Special thanks to Credo for their help in producing and promoting this episode. To visit any part of today's conversation, you can read the full transcript at vscventures.com. Our thanks to Josue Ramiro for posting those every week. Lastly, if you've listened this far, please leave us a rating on Spotify or a review on iTunes. It only takes a few seconds, really helps us out, and as far as I know, it's still carbon neutral. Well, that's it for now. We'll see you all next week on Climb by VSC.